and welcome to Nothing But Static. It's a TV podcast. No, it's not. I'm doing the wrong podcast, Chris. Should I try that again?
That's all right, because I fully touched the mic. I patted the foam down, and I was like, that was probably noisier than I intended, so it's all good.
So you nudged the mic. I named the wrong podcast. Christ, it's a good start. Should we try again?
And we're reviewing Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. So let's go.
So it's gonna be a good day. Roll the music. We'll do it again. Hello and welcome to Rewind Reviews, a podcast where we review old movies, generally speaking, from our past. We're asking the age-old question. That any good? Was that any good? The answer this week, no, it's terrible. Cool. Thanks everyone for coming. Thanks everyone.
And I think we both, Indiana Jones, we've done the last three. You can get our thoughts on the franchise as a whole, and actually our summary of the franchise as a whole. Last week's episode, because I sort of surprised Dan with this as like an epilogue. We usually do a trilogy, but I said I'm a completionist, so we're going to do Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And I think it's fair to say that I was going in positive, I really enjoyed those movies, but they're not a big part of my childhood. I kind of, there's been some stinkers in the past where, I've still just let them wash over me. Like in terms of like franchise movies in particular.
Yeah.
And, you just watch them and go. I can't remember too many instances where I've fully raged. Although X-Men Apocalypse, I came really close because that's just awful.
Yeah.
But, the worst Marvel movies early on, I didn't like some in the recent phase, but, let them wash over me. And like I say, no particular nostalgia for Indiana Jones, just my enjoyment of them, for the last three episodes. And Dan hadn't watched it in a while, so you were like, right, it might not be as bad as I thought. Let's, there was a lot of negativity surrounding it. Let's give it a whirl.
Yeah, let's give it a whirl outside of the discourse of the moment when it came out and the disappointment at the moment. Let's look at it with fresh, sensible adult eyes and judge it on its own merits and try not to think too much about, but it's not the same. But it turns out, Chris, the problem is definitely not that it's not like the previous ones. The problem is it's just a bad movie in all
but that's part
the
of the
other
problem
areas.
as well, because I literally put this movie on, and I'm ready for a good time. I'm ready for some swashbuckling Indiana Jones. Sure. I know it's not going to be as good, but I'm not bothered. And then the movie starts, and I go into this movie going, it's not about affinity with the franchise for me. I'm not worried. And like literally, the movie starts, and my first thought is like, well, this doesn't feel like Indiana Jones. It's so missing the beat. But also, aside from that, it's just really bad. And look, I get, some defend it, and there are some good ideas in there. Some good ideas. None of them are executed well at all. Like, it's crazy how bad a lot of this movie is. Like, just eyes opened, boggling bad. Like, yeah.
Yeah, and I think I at one point in the midst of my notes, I just wrote not specific to. Usually my notes are just for specific scenes, like to remind me that the beats of the movie, but also to like remind me to make sure I talk about different elements of the movie. My notes tend to be like I'm watching a scene about one thing, and I'll make a note about that specific thing. I don't really write overall thoughts in that. I'll let those kind of come to me in the moment. But at some point in the middle of the film, I've just found a note that says, "This is a joyless slog of a film." That's all I wrote. I don't know at what point I was inspired to write that, and it's kind of irrelevant. Where's the magic gone, Chris? What happened here? What went wrong? And I think we can rule out the things because often when a movie has a big cultural impact and is enjoyed by both film nerds And sort of more casual film fans, people who just go see a couple of movies a year, they might like the big tentpole movies, your Marvels, your Star Warses, your Indiana Joneses, but they're not seeing everything. They're not seeing mid-tier to indie movies. They're mostly just going to see the big ones, right? When those people didn't also like this movie, something's gone wrong, right? But the problem often is they don't necessarily have the tool set to analyze what the problem is. And I find this quite often when a movie doesn't work, people will, when it's enjoyed by a large group of people, they will often cite the wrong things. This is not uncommon, and it's not no one's fault. It's just, if you're not steeped deep in media discourse, because you're a casual film fan, you watch a couple movies a year, you're not going to have the tool set to explain exactly why the movie didn't work for you. You're just going to know it didn't work for you, right?
But also, it does also sometimes mean the opposite. Like, Rise of Skywalker is a good example where I got family members that just didn't mind the movie at all, and I was just sat there going, but from an analytical point of view, it's so broken, and they're looking at me like, who gives a fuck? So sometimes it's not a bad thing. Sometimes, a bad movie or a movie where another great example. We talked about this on the podcast. I did not like the last 20 minutes of... Well, no, sorry, that's not fair. I had a negative review of the last episode of Happy Valley because I felt that in terms of its structure and the way it wrapped up its storylines, some elements of it were appalling. That did not bother the majority of people at all. And I'm not saying I'm cleverer or any shit like that. I'm saying that because my brain is analysing that way, it's a real negative in the case of that episode of that show.
Right. But in the case of this movie, most people had a negative reaction, and a lot of people couldn't identify why. And you heard things like it just wasn't like the old ones, like, Mutt Williams is the problem. It was a terrible idea to introduce a son of Indiana Jones. Oh, I didn't like the aliens. The aliens are the problem. Now, I'm going to tell you guys right now, spoiler alert, none of those things are the problem with this movie. Now, I'm not 100% sure exactly where this movie's issues come from, and maybe we'll talk it through and hopefully get to the bottom of it during this discussion, or at least some way towards figuring it out. Because this movie is perplexingly bad. What was that, sir?
Or at least our opinion on it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, No, I thought that. Yeah, implied. As goes with anything we discuss on this podcast, we're only ever talking for ourselves. Obviously, yeah, we're not. We're not the be all and end all arbitrators of what doesn't work. But I don't think this movie works for a great number of people, and I think often the wrong things get pointed at, and I think on paper any of those things could have worked. There's nothing theoretically wrong with Mutt Williams being introduced, in my opinion. The idea of potentially setting up a young new adventurer to take the franchise into the future is not a terrible idea at all. Making them the child of the previous one, no problem at all. And I think there's evidence of that across many different franchises where they've done something similar. There was a recent example we've talked about, which is they did in Star Trek Picard Season 3. They brought in a character that is Picard's son, and it's like, yeah, okay, Secret Sons they always feel a bit soap opera. But if handled correctly, as it was in Picard, it can be actually quite charming.
And whilst they didn't make another movie with this character, everyone wanted more from the daughter character in Logan. Like, everyone was like,
right.
I'll take another. Like, it really, really worked in that film. Like, in principle, the idea is the same. For anyone saying, obviously the execution is different, but the principle of the idea,
right.
Introduce a younger character with a similar skill set, and whether Mutt Williams should have the skill set and should randomly be Tarzan is a separate thing. I'm talking about the principle of the idea. It's very similar to Logan. Like, it is. And Logan absolutely works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think even though in Logan she's not like his biological daughter, she is in all but name, right? She has his power set. She's thrust upon him when he wasn't expecting to have suddenly a young person following in his footsteps attached to him. He has an affinity for the character because of their similarity, and the movie sort of sets him up as almost passing on the torch. The beats, the premise in its sort of generalities are the same, but the details are different, and they help make it work. And I think it is the details that really hurt this. I think there are choices made with the character that hurt him as a character, but it's not that he exists. It's how it's then executed that's the problem, and it's the same. It's the same with the element at the end with the aliens. We normally separate these movies out into spoilers, non-spoilers, but obviously this movie has been like talked about to death. Like, people joke about the aliens. I mean, it's called Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Like they weren't exactly hiding that it was going to be an extraterrestrial element to this movie. Crystal Skull's famously connected to lore of grey men and stuff. So, I don't think anyone was too surprised by that. But for anyone wondering as well, because I realised this after, I didn't even remember, Chris, that Mutt Williams' parentage is kept a secret for a portion of the movie. It's been so discussed. So I actually accidentally spoiled this movie for you without realising I was doing it, because I thought he was introduced and Indy already knew he had a son and was like, Christ, it's this loser, this layabout that I don't care for.
But again, it's such a cultural impact. I knew that from osmosis anyway. I knew Shia LaBeouf was playing his son before you said it. So
sure.
In the same way that I knew Sean Connery was his dad. Don't worry about that.
Yeah, and I think here's the thing as well, right? Here's the other thing. Not only is there nothing wrong in principle with the idea of Mutt Williams, I think actually there's a real potential for it to have not just been passable, but brilliant. The idea, having just gone through Last Crusade, which was a story of a father and a son, of echoing that story and having Indy realise he'd become his own father, where he'd known he had a son the whole time, but had chosen to keep him at arm's length, and his son coming to find him because he needed help, forcing them together through an adventure, and them learning to sort of find peace with who each other is. Could have been a really nice beat, shuffling Indy into the role of his own father and having him learn something about himself and his own relationship with his dad by having realised he became his dad. I just think there was so much potential for storytelling there.
They even hint at that. The way Indy says, well, if you like doing it, then do it. Don't worry about what anyone else says. And then when he finds out his son, it's his son, being like, and by the way, you're finishing school. Like, he's, terrible. You know what I mean? That is, it's terrible. But as a notion, what they were trying to explore there is interesting. And not only is there great character stuff behind the idea, and that's kind of, I think we're on track. So let's go into Mutt Williams then. Let's start there, because Dan's right. Because also we do spoilers, non-spoilers, as if we're recommending. We've literally described this movie as shit and awful, so it's clear we're not recommending it.
Yeah, I honestly watch if you want to see this movie or experience the story basically prior to going into the cinema, because you're going to see Dial of Destiny and you kind of want to make sure you caught up on the franchise. Honestly, just watch watch the pitch meeting for this or something. Watch a video that sort of hits the beats, just so you know what happens in the movie. Don't watch it. I really couldn't recommend it.
Yeah, even there's bound to be recap videos coming out now in lead up to Die.
And that's coming from, we're completionists. There's a reason Chris chose this. And even I'm going, don't do it to yourself. It's so joyless.
It's really bad, guys. It's really
such a
really
slog.
Bad.
Yeah. Such a slog.
The other, as well
as all of the charm is just gone.
As well as the character exploration opportunities with Mutt Williams, especially when you have in this story Henry Sr. has passed away, and we look at the photo in the beginning and stuff. As well as the character opportunities, there's also a really logical and good and clever story use of the character as well, which is he is the bridge that brings him back to Mary, and that's how they end up, and then they end up married at the end. If this was meant to be the final movie, the notion of, well, let's introduce a young character and that will reunite him with his love from the first movie, and we'll end on marriage and him settling down, which he's never actually done before, and that's he's the dean, he's got his more of a full-time job. and he's settled down and married. Indy is essentially retired. Like, if that's the story you want to tell, if you think you're doing the last movie, then having the son, where there's the opportunity to, if you wanted to, if it was a success, spin off into other stories using him, and you maybe have Indy appear in more of a Henry Senior role. If you from a story franchise point of view, the character, because he sets him off on the adventure. Like, he's not, even though the execution is so the character's got no depth and isn't doing anything, as an idea, having his long lost son set him off on the adventure and then ultimately lead him to his retirement and the end of his story is a good idea on paper. Like, it's not a bad idea to introduce the son, because actually the idea of what you're doing with the son is clever. The character has no depth and all that stuff. Like, but the idea of introducing the son, I maintain, is a good one.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think there's so much potential for storytelling there. There was just 100 different ways that would have been executing it better. I mean, literally, this is pretty much the worst possible version of this story I could imagine in terms of forgetting the adventure for a minute, and we'll get to that because there's issues with that too. But just like in terms of a setup for an Indiana Jones movie, like I couldn't imagine a less interesting, more flat, more sort of like stripping it of anything interesting it could have been about version of this story. You know, are you buttering toast or something? I'm hearing scraping.
No, I was doing that thing where I itched my eye, sorry, and it hit the mic.
Oh, gotcha, no problem. It's fine. I was just thinking, like, is he having toastable things? It's not the morning, Chris.
I was itching my eye.
Have a lunch is toast. For those listening, it's 12:30. Be about time for lunch.
Yeah, but if
all you were eating for lunch was toast, I'd be disappointed in you, Chris.
I mean, that might be what I have for lunch because we haven't got much in. But I mean, I have been, whilst I have on Nothing But Static, if we've recorded on the morning, and I've been bought in toast, eaten quickly away from the mic, it would be a bold move to like be buttering toast.
I thought so.
Like, do you think I'm just in the kitchen making lunch? Well, what do you think are the problems with the execution of Mutt then?
I think it's a few different things. I think keeping it hidden for most of the movie hurts the movie. I think that's a bad choice straight away. I know they liked the sound of the reveal, but it means that you can't actually deal with any of the character stuff because the characters don't really know who they are to each other until later in the movie. And for those of you saying, well, you know, they have lots of conversations that are very Bondy, very father-son, they do. And actually that hurts Indy's character because the idea that Indy behaves completely differently or feels completely differently about Mutt once he knows it, he's actually being like a pretty decent, supportive dad until he finds out he's actually his dad. And I just think, while I think the idea of that is I don't think that's unintentional. I think that's design. I think they were going for Indy becomes his dad once he realizes he actually is responsible for this child, and until then he's actually like a really supportive father figure. You know, that's what they were going for. I don't think that works. I think the problem you have is that it makes him seem inconsistent as a character, but it also makes him seem like he's learnt nothing. Do you know what I mean? Like, he seems so wise and so supportive in those early scenes. The idea that just finding out this child is actually his son changes his entire perspective. And it's like, you're going back to school. And it seems like it's just for a cheap joke rather than for proper character development too. So I think one of the ways you would fix this execution, personally, is by having him find out or already know at the start of the movie. So Mutt comes in search of him. He already knows who Mutt is. He's kept him at arm's distance. It's like Indy going after Henry in the previous movie, but in reverse. And, you know, Mutt maybe... I also think in characterization, I think making him a greaser was done purely for the... Oh, greasers were in the 50s. I don't think it helps his character.
Not the only instance of that in the movie, is it? But yes, carry on.
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, we'll come to that too. But like, I just think like that choice feels like it's because of the era more than because the character needs it. I don't think it informs the character at all. I think it ends up meaning we waste a lot of scenes establishing him as quote unquote greaser that doesn't really add up to anything. I think it would have been better if maybe he'd like shunned academia and was just like a pretty normal guy. Like, you know, maybe he still rode a motorcycle and had a leather jacket on him, but like not quite such a, you know, dipping his comb in a Coke and whizzing it through his hair, you know, although that is a funny scene. Although I then spent the entire rest of that scene making, like, keep my eye on that glass of Coke, like, will someone drink from that? He just dipped his comb in it. Like, I hope the table behind they didn't see him do it. I hope they don't drink it, because that would be really gross. So no one drank it, I can assure you. I watched it. I don't think it really informs us of anything of his character. I think it's okay for him to be sort of rebellious and stuff without him directly being that sort of greaser archetype, or at least not leaning into it so heavily, because so many scenes are dedicated to really establishing that, and it doesn't add anything. I think it would have been more beneficial to establish like who he was in relation to who Indy is, in the sense of like spending more time sort of going like, what are the differences between these two characters? So Indy from a young age was out protecting archaeology and interested in history, and this kid has just gone the exact opposite way. In fact, when he goes to get him to go get their mother, he's like, I don't know, she was investigating a thing. I have no idea what. I have no information about what. I also don't care. I literally just want to go get my mum back. Like, it would actually do a really good job of separating the characters in a way that's interesting, because I think, like, you know, Indy, it feels like as a kid, if someone had kidnapped his dad, which is actually what happens in the last movie, you know, he'd be partially going for his dad, partially going for the thing, the you know, the MacGuffin, whatever the crusade is, whatever the adventure is. Whereas it'd be nice to see a contrast where Mutt's literally like, Indy's like, oh, well, it could be the Crystal Skull and this and that, and Mutt's just like, yeah, I literally don't care. My mum's out there. Can we go get her, please? Like, I think that would create a better contrast between the characters. There's just anything, yeah, really. I'll be honest with you, anything that isn't this.
They kind of do elements of that with him being, you know, afraid of the bugs. And I quite like that moment. That felt like that. There's so many jokes and moments in this that didn't feel like Indiana Jones. Yeah. But Indy turning to him and saying, that's the thing with scorpions. It's the big one. The big ones are fine. It's the little ones that if you get hit by a little one, tell someone or whatever. That was a cool moment. So they kind of with Mutt. And it's the problem with this whole movie is, things often exist to serve the purpose of the scene in question, or a joke, or not the whole movie or the characters. Like what we talked about, where, you know, it absolutely feels like the whole do what you want, you're going to school thing is serving the joke as opposed to the character. And I think with Mutt at the beginning, he's scared of everything because that serves that moment. That serves the kind of reluctant adventurer moment and stuff, and he just wants to, you know, get his mum and whatever. You know, he's scared of the scorpions. He's scared of all these things. And then, when action scenes need to serve him being the potential replacement, he's literally swinging through the trees like Tarzan with monkeys. Like, and the two things completely contradict. But they're there to serve that specific, to serve the scene, to serve that. The
characters are consistent between the start of a scene and the end of a scene, and not beyond.
Yeah, and it's not even like Mutt Williams. This is the problem with the whole film. We're zeroing on Mutt Williams for the Mutt Williams discussion. I mean, that's a much bigger fucking problem for Marcus. Oh, it's all right. We'll just write a line. No, not Marcus. Sorry, the kind of Marcus. Is the character's name Marcus? No, it was Marcus.
No, Marcus is the guy from the previous one. You're referring to John Hurt's character, Professor
Mac.
Oxley.
No, I'm not even. Yes, for Oxley, I'm referring to Mac. oh, well, we'll just have him switch sides every 5 minutes, and this is a bit weird. We're toing and froing with Mac a little bit, aren't we? Yeah, you're right. Let's have a line acknowledging it and have Indy say, you're a triple agent, it doesn't make any sense, or whatever the line is. Let's just slip that in and that will cover it. It's bad writing. It's really bad writing, and it's indicative with Mutt, it's indicative with Oxley, it's indicative with Mac, it's indicative with Indy, it's indicative with Mary. They're fighting 1 minute, and then he says one nice thing, and she's all gooey eyes and smiles, even though that's not really what their relationship was before.
Or her character
serves that scene.
Her character was stronger than that, and was more strong-willed than that. Yeah.
And so I know I've just named a whole bunch of things at once, but I'm saying the problems with Mutt, I think, are indicative. It's not the idea
of the whole
movie. It's indicative of the whole movie.
Yeah, I think this really does mostly come down. I mean, there's some filmmaking stuff that I don't love either, which we'll come back to. But I think on the whole, if this script wasn't so incompetently written, this would have been a worst case scenario. It would have been like passable. I think really the issues of this film come down to the characters. It is simultaneously flat and joyless, and that is a really dangerous combination. Like it's flat, joyless, and like it feels rushed. I don't mean the film feels rushed pacing wise. I mean it feels like the script was rushed. Like it feels like it was like the second or third draft, and they didn't bother reworking it. It just feels like a really early sketch out of how the movie should work, and then no one ever went back and actually like polished it, made it what makes sense, and made the character stuff work, and actually like streamlined it. It's all over the place from a screenwriting perspective, and that is the biggest issue, I think. I think David Coep, I never know how to pronounce his surname, has a lot to answer for the reason this movie was such a problem, I think. And there are some stuff, don't get me wrong, there are some things in the filmmaking side of it that I don't love, but that is the real issue, I think. It's the writing.
We've tackled some let's do some temp poles of the movie, if that's the right phrase. So you mentioned Mutt. You also, within it's not necessarily this, it's not necessarily this, mentioned aliens. So let's talk about aliens. So my thing with aliens
about aliens. It's a new segment of the podcast, guys. Let's talk about aliens with Chris and Dan.
Hey. So I don't personally. I'm with you. I think we actually had the discussion last week as well.
Yeah, I think aliens I said this because it's often the first thing I say when I talk about this movie. So I may have even said it multiple times across the the 3 other Indiana Jones podcasts we've done when this movie's come up. But I've always had the strong belief the aliens are not the problem, even though it's the first thing people talk about. Indiana just the alien one. Yeah, that's not the issue.
Yeah, because it's got aliens, but you know what? The previous films have had voodoo or the Ark of the Covenant, or let's not forget, Temple of Doom has a scene where a man's heart is pulled out, still beating. Like there's sort of mystical, out there, supernatural stuff in all of these movies, and yes, this moves slightly from sort of mystical to sci-fi, and that is a different genre, but though? It is still
because is this not the old Marvel thing of like magic and science? You might call something you don't understand magic. That doesn't mean there isn't a science to it within the context of the world. In the last movie, there was a cup that if you drank from it, you could live forever. Right? And there was a guy that was like a few thousand years old, living in that cave, guarding the Ark. Yeah. Not the Ark, sorry, the Grail. How is that any more unbelievable than this?
Yeah, that's very fair. Very fair. So, I don't have a problem with the idea. Again, the execution for me is the issue. Yes. So when we're dealing with all these big ideas before, in Raiders, are they going to be caught in the crossfire here? They know that people are making the wrong decision. They've tried to stop them, but they won't. Is that going to defeat them? The Last Crusade is probably the best example. Like you say, there's a cup that they're drinking from that's going to make someone live forever, but the context of that is, can he get there and save his father's life? Is his father going to be able to drink from it? There's these small, intimate trials and the three tests that they have to do. In the second film, it's underground, and whilst we then do the bridge thing, that's after the reveal, after we've kind of dealt with this underground network of fire and caves and all that stuff. There's a character-led intimacy to those big ideas, even if the ideas are quite bombast, if that's the right word. Is bombast the right word?
Bombastic?
Even if the ideas are quite large scale, they're handled in a kind of intimate way. The epicness of the other movies comes from like Temple of Doom. It's then that bridge fight, but that's not really about what the thing is, what the Temple of Doom is. In Raiders, there's the aeroplane scenes and the chase sequences, but they're not about the thing. This movie has a giant fucking spaceship. Go destroy the city and then fly up out of the sky. It has a really bad CGI generic alien making someone either go to their home planet or blow up under the weight of knowledge, but we don't care about that because Cate Blanchett's villain, not necessarily her fault, is written so one note and we don't invest in the villain. You could argue that for a lot of the villains in these films, but really so with her. So it's not, I don't think it's the concept, it's the fact, because actually, when the concept is, because it's a fucking alien from the beginning. It looks like an alien. Cate Blanchett talks really early in the movie about it being aliens, and he's fucking holding up this relatively cheap-looking alien skull for the entire movie. Aliens aren't the problem, it's the large-scale, overblown, I don't need to see a spaceship in an Indiana Jones movie. I need to see a hint of where a spaceship might have been and mystery on, yes, is that this?
Exactly right.
I need to see, I need to see underground temples that could maybe be a spaceship, like who knows? I don't need to see a CGI alien blow a woman's head up and then a spaceship leave.
It's too overt. You nailed it on the head. I think bombastic is the right word. I googled it to get the exact definition, Chris. I'm going to read you the definition of the word bombastic, and I want you to tell me if you think you're right here. And I think you're spot on. High sounding, but with little meaning, e.g., inflated.
Yes. Yeah.
Because that's what they've done. They've gone big when it should have been subtle. I think, look at Raiders for a minute. We'll just take Raiders because Raiders is so we talked about the previous three movies, and the conclusion we came to was Raiders is your baseline Indiana Jones movie. Temple of Doom is what you get when you go a bit darker and lean into the action and the threat, and Crusade is what you get when you lean into the sort of joyous adventurous version of the movie, right? So you get that's the spectrum of Indiana Jones, right? So we'll stick with Raiders as the example because it's baseline, right? The supernatural element of Raiders is hinted at all movie, right? There's constant talk about what's inside this box and the power that the box might have. The movie ends with them opening the box, and while what's physically happening is overt, the scale of it is actually contained to a number of people on a mountainside in the middle of nowhere, right? Here, what we have is a whole movie's worth of constant over supernatural tones, because the whole time through Raiders you're wondering if it's real, and I don't mean is the arc real, is any of the magic of the arc, the threat of the arc real, right? You get to the end of the movie, they open it, there's their comeuppance. It was. If this movie had been smarter about being subtler, if we didn't see what was in that casket that we got at the beginning of the movie, the sort of the alien body, whatever you want to call it, if throughout the rest of the movie we hadn't had such overt references to that, and then at the end of the movie, exactly as you said, we see a spaceship-sized chunk of the mountain vanish with the villain inside, and we're left to put that together, that is way more effective, mysterious, creepy, than just having them come face-to-face with a big CGI alien. For a couple of reasons. One, just from a storytelling perspective, that's just more interesting. Like, you fill the gaps in, gives it a bit of mystery. As with even same with the last one with Crusade. We didn't know that the Grail really did keep people alive for that long, and even at the end, we're left wondering about its exact nature. It's not like, I suppose it's overt in that we do know there's a guy that's theoretically lived there thousands of years, but we don't even know that guy's telling the truth. Like, there's enough. There's enough room there's enough wiggle room that you could you could debate it.
The phrase you're looking for, I think, is open to interpretation.
Yes. Right. Exactly.
This isn't open to interpretation. There's a fucking spaceship and a CGI alien. There's no nuances there.
No. And I just think it wouldn't. Look, it doesn't need to be very subtle. It doesn't need to be so subtle that it's completely 50-50, because I don't think the other movies are 50-50. I think the other movies are pretty, are definitely leaning towards, it's the supernatural thing. I mean, we watch those Nazis get their faces melted off. We watch that voodoo work on Indy in the second movie, and we see the cup heal Henry in the third movie.
Yeah.
But it's done in a way that you're just like, oh, how did this happen? How does this work? Where did this come from? But at the end of
those things, sorry to interrupt you, but all of those things, listen to the description of those things. We see the cup save Henry. We see the voodoo change Indiana Jones, and he's going against his friends who are there yelling at him. Short Round is pounding on his chest, trying to get him to come back. And we have an entire movie which is about Indy not believing, and then at the moment we see the supernatural thing, he looks away and makes the choice to believe. All of these supernatural things are grounded in character-based decisions and actions. Other than Cate Blanchett being wrong, tell me what character shit is in... And Mac deciding he's neither one side or the other, he's just greedy. The only thin character stuff in that end sequence in this is to do with the villains. There is nothing connected to our heroes, and all the other examples, those supernatural big, idea moments are all rooted in character, and it's not here. So again, it's not that it's aliens, it's that the execution is too big and not rooted in character.
It's like the script didn't care what the MacGuffin was. It's like I tell you what it's like. It's like George Lucas really liked the idea of it being aliens, and Steven Spielberg was lukewarm on it but went with it anyway, which is what actually happened. This is what happens when someone who's not passionate about something is asked to write the thing or work on the thing, because I feel like that was Lucas's idea, and he felt passionately that could really work. And I think he's right on paper. I think that could work. But what he should have recognised, and what they all should have recognised, was if they're not that sold on the idea and making it interesting and mysterious and engaging, then you're using the wrong MacGuffin. Because here's the thing as well. You have two options with an Indiana Jones movie. You really have to go into tying the MacGuffin to Indy's own belief system. Or you have to make that irrelevant to Indy, to everyone, right? And make it a small part of the movie. People are like, Indy, supernatural shit's happening. He's like, I literally don't care. I've got my MacGuffin. Let's go. Like, I've got this goal, and this is what matters to me right now. I'm saving my friends, or I'm doing this, or I'm, whatever it is.
Yeah. In this case, it could have been, it doesn't matter. I've got my son.
Right.
I've discovered I've got a son. Who cares?
Yeah. How about that? Oh, even better. See, Chris, look, and I know we do this a lot, and I'm sorry to the people who don't like it when we do this, but, rewriting a movie. But picture this, Chris. Mott Williams is in trouble, right? He's going to fall into a volcano. I don't know, whatever, right? Or a big cavern. He's hanging. And through the other room, the whole movie, Indy has been wondering about this alien stuff and if it's real. And he wants to know. Part obsession of his. Since the government 18 months ago showed him that first body, he's wanted the answers. And there's a doorway in the distance where the bad guy's just gone in with the crystal skull, and you can hear all the chaos happening in there, and there's a big gold light shining through, and he could go and find the answers. It's right there. He could go look through and see if it's aliens for himself. But he chooses to save Mutt. And then they leave. And he never looks back. And then Mutt goes, but you never found out. And Indy goes, some things I don't need to know, kid. Like, fine. Something like that. Spitballing. But, like, then it's rooted in character. The MacGuffin then becomes a thing that makes... It means more to us because it means something to Indy. But in this movie, all the characters feel deeply disconnected from what's happening. And my golden rule, if I don't care about the things, I don't care about the people, then how am I supposed to care about what happens to the people?
Yeah.
Which then leads us to the next issue, which is the action.
Yeah, so was that your third thing of it's not necessarily this, it's not that? I can't remember if it was. But and also, someone's drilling somewhere. Apologies if that's been picked up. It's either outside or a neighbour. Yeah, let's talk about the action, because the action's also pretty bad. Do you want to... I ranted away about aliens. Do you want to... At the start of it, do you want to kick this part of the conversation off, Dan?
Yeah, and I think it comes... Look, it comes down to a couple of different factors. I think, first of all, it is lack of caring about the characters. The script didn't do enough to establish the characters, make me care about the characters. It also didn't do enough to make me care too much about their goals. So the action scenes then just become roller coasters that I'm bored of, because I don't feel any threat. I don't feel any sense of threat. I don't feel any sense of stakes. Sorry, my TV just made a bloopy noise at me. 1 second. I'm going to mute it. There you go. It's muted. That was my Xbox telling me it's going to turn off to save power in a few minutes.
Nice. Very nice.
Yeah, we used it to watch TV at lunch. Anyway, I think it's even if there's action scenes were brilliantly shot, choreographed, physically, perfect action scenes in terms of their construction, I still would struggle to be invested because the script hasn't invested me in the characters and it's not invested me in their goals. But then, on top of that, the action scenes themselves all feel like they were put together in an afternoon. It's just a bunch of generic, I jump into this car, you jump into that car. Now this car is being chased by this car. I'm going to bonk a guy in the head. Great, now this car's going over here. It's just aimless things happening because things need to be happening. And I think the epitome of bad ideas in an action sequence as well is because the other thing that happens in this movie is a lot of the action sequences in this movie too silly for their own good. I think, the key example, the one most people will talk about, is Mutt Williams swinging through the trees, through the vines with the monkeys. Now, I don't think that is an unsalvageable idea, right? So, again, sorry, I know people hate when we do this, but quick pitch, Chris, right? Mutt Williams gets stuck on the vine and he's up in the tree and they're all driving off, right? And he has no way to help, yeah? But in the action, they get turned around and start coming back towards where he is, right? But they're on the other side of a path now that he can get to but only with one quick swing, right? And he's a scared character. We've seen this in him. He's terrified. But he grabs the vine. He knows he can help. He takes a breath. And he does it. And he gathers his courage. And it's a big hero moment. He swings over. And he's the one that kicks the villain off his mum before she gets hurt. Or like someone gets a MacGuffin or whatever. And sort of he has a little hero moment and saves the day there. Sees something in himself for a moment that he can be brave like his dad. Then it's fine.
Well, you know what's also good about that? At the beginning of the movie, Indy goes for a big swing and misses and says, "I thought that was closer." You're subtly implying Indy's no longer able to make that judgment, but even though he's scared, his son is.
Yes. Perfect. Good. You make him... I love it when that happens. It's the Taika Waititi thing of what... Taika Waititi once had this great quote where he said, well, what you do is you write the movie and then everyone tells you all about the interesting themes and context and all this stuff and you go, yep, I meant that.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with that. But so there's a simple version of that moment that's tied to character that works perfectly well. But that's not what happens. What happens is They pass in the car. He gets stuck up in the trees. They keep going. Loads of action's happening. At this point, as far as I'm concerned, they're about 5 miles ahead of him. And he, inspired by a monkey he sees, realizes he can swing. And not just one swing, one, realistic, slightly on the edge of, like, how trained do you have to be to make that work? But at the same time... Yeah. He Spider-Mans through the fucking trees. It looks like
a scene from Tarzan or Spider-Man.
Yeah. Yep. He swings, then grabs onto the next vine and swings on that, grabs onto the next, and it's just so far beyond belief and beyond my... It breaks the verisimilitude of the scene, because there's an element of believability that any scene will get from me, right? There's an element of going with it I will give to any movie and scene. But I have a threshold for where that's broken, my believability, where my buy-in gives out, right? When you push my goodwill too far, and I go, no, this no longer seems believable. And Mutt Williams swinging through the trees is one of them. Now, there are many others. We'll talk about the fridge. We'll come back to the fridge. Lead is magic.
That isn't my biggest problem with the fridge, but we'll come back to it.
Well, yeah, he'd be soup after the impact, or he'd be boiled to death by the heat.
Even that, fuck it. Let's do it. We're there. Let's do it now. Even those things aren't... The logistics of the fridge aren't my problem. It's so fucking unnecessary. It's so... Oh, well, it's set in the 50s, so let's sort of play on, like, the sort of that era and the Cold War and all of that stuff. It's like someone, I don't know who, Lucas, Spielberg, someone wanted to do that idea. Someone wanted that visual, and they shoehorn it in at the end of another action sequence. Like, we literally cut to the next day, and randomly, inexplicably, for no reason at all, he's in that town which is being used for testing or whatever. Like, I think there was a term for those towns, and he notices everyone's fate. And it is,
unfortunately, as much as I want to criticise that, it is based on a real thing that happened. So we'll talk about that in truth.
Yes.
But yes.
Yes, but they're not. That's it. Regardless, it doesn't do anything.
Nope.
It's not relevant to this movie. Like, it's literally a 4-minute sequence that doesn't account for anything that came before it or after it. It's literally the worst version of, well, it's set in 1957, so let's do this. Well, why? Why are you going to do that? What's the purpose of doing that?
Yeah.
There isn't.
What does it add to this story?
Someone wanted to do it. Someone went, you know that they used to say that fridges could do this, and someone went, right, well, let's put it in an Indiana Jones movie. And I don't understand how many people must have had to, the thing that's usually set like in sort of underground caves and like the jungle and globe. You want him to get in a fridge, like it's so again, it's bombastic for the sake of it, but it doesn't. It adds literally nothing. You can remove that scene from the movie and it wouldn't make a difference. In fact, because you could literally just imply that he'd been picked up by the CIA or whatever, which is what's implied. I think we just straight cut from him getting out the fridge to that anyway.
And that's what breaks my brain is so you've got a scene that really fucks with my believability scale, right? For better or worse, right? Like you've chosen to put the scene, you've chosen to film the scene, right? You've made that call, but you're sitting there in the edit, and you look at it and go, well, this breaks the movie because it's so early in the movie, and we've already said we're throwing all sense. We're saying we're throwing all sense of like logic, believability in the action, threat out the window, because I do think it's a massive story problem that he shouldn't have survived that, because then from that point on, he's a rubber man. He's just a magic rubber man that will not be hurt and will not die. That first scene in the warehouse, when he underestimates the leap and he lands in the car, you feel threat. You feel danger. The best scene in this movie is that opening scene, action-wise, by quite some way. Because at that point, I'm still invested.
I'll come back to that because I quite like another one, but yeah, carry on.
Or if you go to the high school, the bike chase, not the high school, the college bike chase, that's also quite good.
Yeah, I quite like that. I do quite like
that.
That
one's also, but again, quite a grounded one where you feel actual threat and stakes. But anyway.
Yeah.
So you've chosen to put the scene in the movie, right? Then you get to the editing and you see it, and it's so absurd that it spoils the entire rest of the movie for me from an action perspective, because he just seems like an invincible rubber magic man now, because there's no way any human would ever survive that scenario under any circumstances for about 20 reasons, right? And I could sit here all day talking about the temperature in which that nuclear blast would have burnt, the distance in which would have been irradiated, the
fact that when the fridge lands, it bounces multiple times. Yeah, categorically, even if he survived the nuclear element, how he survives being in the fridge as it crashes.
He'd be a soup. He wouldn't be a man anymore. He'd be a slushy. So yeah. Everybody Brown and his body broken, definitely dead, 100% dead. And then even if not, if you could even get me to believe that, he opens that fridge door and he's irradiated immediately, because there's no way the blast cleared him of the radiation. Anyway, doesn't matter, right? You've got a scene in the movie that you've chosen to put in, and none of it is believable. And you go, oh fuck, well fuck now, we filmed it and it's so connected to the plot. The thing that's most offensive about the fact that it doesn't do anything for the story is how easily cuttable it would have been. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is such an offensive choice. Like, take it out of the movie. Because as Chris said, you could take it out for no cost. Like, in terms of, like, it costs you nothing story-wise. It doesn't affect the pacing. It doesn't affect anything. It's already a pointless scene. And then you salvage the verisimilitude for longer.
And, you might be thinking, yeah, but if you did that, you might have to do a little bad ADR in the interrogation scene. Watch that interrogation scene again, my friends. There is some shocking ADR all over that fucking scene.
Yeah. So, like, there's 101 reasons that breaks the reality of the movie, that scene. But there's also 101 reasons that it just doesn't need to be there. So it's doubling down. It's like, it's hurting the movie and it's irrelevant. So it's like, why is this here? Sometimes, look, if the studio could decide to remove the incredible ending of Little Shop of Horrors, because even though there was all this amazing puppet and miniature work that was going on, and it took, a guy years of his life to put that sequence together, if they could heartlessly just cut that because they didn't think it made the movie work, I don't think any amount of work shooting the Indy goes into the town that was for nuclear testing and gets bombed out of its scene could have been, no amount of production on that could have been worth the damage it does to the film itself. And the fact that no one saw that and no one identified that is embarrassing. And then you've got the weird joke about the fucking prairie dog gopher thing that's all like sticking its head up and looking at him.
The golfers and the see, and it starts with that. That's one of the opening shots of the movie, isn't it? Like the molehill and the gopher pops.
See, I thought it was a gopher, but I heard someone refer to it as a prairie dog in a video I saw. So now I'm kind of like, is it a prairie dog? What's a prairie dog? I don't know what a prairie dog is, Chris. I'm simply I'm simply trusting that that's the correct term for whatever that is.
Oh, right, okay, fair enough. And it just, that just adds to the whole, it doesn't feel like Indiana Jones thing. In terms of the action sequences, as you say, the opening, I think, is very good because it feels like it is rooted in character. It's rooted in, are they too old for this? Can they still do this? They're getting away from, we know who they're getting away from, we know why. There's like this army of them, it's got suspense. And the college chase sequence. I don't love the beginning because again, it just feels like, almost emulating Grease, just feels like the wrong version of, if you're going to make him a greaser, fine, but just that scene where it's like Greasers v whatever, the jocks or whatever it was just a bit like, it just felt like the most obvious way in the world to execute that idea, when actually the notion of, we've done a lot of war stuff, let's do a lot of 50s stuff, is on paper a good idea. Executed poorly. I also don't like that the statue of Marcus gets like beheaded and stuff, and I think that's a bit that doesn't sit well with me. But the library stuff, the get out of the library, and then they go on a motorbike out of the library. Indy going in one car one side, and then out that same car the other side. Yeah, all of that stuff is fun and fills Indiana Jones.
And I don't mind, like, they use it to do a little bit of character stuff, because there's a moment when Mutt's like, "Hey, you really know how to give a punch." Like, he's surprised because he finds Indy and he's like, "Ah, some fucking nerd professor, man," because it's the contractually required Indiana Jones in his nerd outfit sequence in the movie. So he's in his glasses and his tweed suit or whatever. And he throws a punch and knocks a guy out, and the kid's like, "Hey, you're pretty good at a fight." And like, I think that's a nice moment. Like, it's Mutt's surprise at Indy's capabilities are fun to watch. There's an element of I think around that point in the movie, I'm thinking, Christ, if it wasn't for the nuclear scene, this has been all right so far. Do you know what I mean? Like, this has been okay, because up till that point, I was like, I don't love this, but I'm more on board than I thought I'd be, and then it's just all downhill from there. And it is, it's, yeah.
I will
how engaged were you with any of the action that followed that? Any from the library chase? The chase that ends in the library, which it does have a funny joke at the end of it. One of the few funny. That's the other problem we'll talk about later. But the humor in this movie just all falls flat. But there's one particularly good joke, which is when they slide into the library on the motorcycle, and one of the kids asks really awkwardly. It's quite funny because it's so ridiculous. Asks Indy like a question about his like term paper or something, and then he's like, "That's the issue. You're always in the library. If you really want to learn archaeology, you got to learn to get out of the library." And then they drive out on the motorbike. It's great. That's funny. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I highlighted that earlier. It's a really good joke. I love I can't remember what I was going to say now. Not much about the movie. No, I was going to answer your question. It's just all generic nonsense when they're chasing them later on. Those two action sequences are, in my opinion, by far the best in the movie, and they, like you just said, they come pretty early on in the movie.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm slightly distracted because it sounds like they're drilling into our wall. So, like, if that can be heard, I'm sorry. Just the action in general is just all overblown. It's everything we talked about. So no, I wasn't very engaged with the action beyond that point at all.
Yeah, and I think that first sequence as well, I will say we didn't give it credit for one of the things it does. Not only is that one of the most interesting action sequences in the whole movie, I love that choice of location. To go to the mysterious giant room full of boxes of artifacts that they've been hoarding for years. I think there's a name for it, like Section 51 or something like that. There's like a in universe name for that storage facility that the Americans have, which is obviously from the end of Raiders. It's where the Ark ends up. And we even get a glimpse of the Ark during that sequence in this. The idea of going, not only are we going to show you that, but we're going to set an action sequence there, and it's going to be Indy, whipping himself over from boxes, one pile of boxes to the next and stuff. Like, such a good idea. Like, such a good idea of location. Such an interesting visual. And that's a good thing as well. He said earlier about, like, how, the nuclear town, doesn't feel like Indiana Jones at all. I don't know what the secret is to making something feel like Indiana Jones, but I've got to tell you, it's the scale, not the location, because I think we could have had a normal Indiana Jones feeling action sequence where it was about getting out of the town before the nuclear bomb hit, and they were having a big chase in vehicles as they were trying to get out, knowing that explosion was going to be happening behind them. Right? So he's fighting with the bad guys, but they're all also trying to get out. So there's an element of like, maybe we need to work together a little bit here because we're all going to die if we stay. You could have done a fun, and that would have felt Indiana Jones. Him climbing in a fridge just doesn't feel Indiana Jones, both as a solution to the problem and as thing. So the actual location is fine, because I think the room full of boxes is quite an interesting and unusual location for an Indiana Jones fight scene. It's not something we've seen before. There's this sort of storage warehouse, but it worked really well, and it still felt really indie. So,
and the use of the gunpowder and the magnetic side of it, felt very Indiana Jones as well.
Because it's him solving. Yes, because that's him solving a problem again with his sort of quick thinking, his problem solving, his like, because that's always what Indy's thing is. It's that he's quite intelligent, and he usually solves a lot of these problems by outwitting his opponent. I think it was the. I think it's the. I can't remember what it was, whether it was an honest trailer. I've not seen either of them in a while, but there's an honest trail for this, I think. And I think there's also there's a pitch meeting for this. One of them points out that in a bunch of scenes in this movie, Indy is just saved by the alien turns on its magnet powers and takes everyone's guns away. But it doesn't seem to do it all of the time. It just seems to do it every now and then when Indy really conveniently needs it. Which is an easy solve, by the way. How about you wrap the alien's head in an anti-magnetic cloth? I literally don't care what the MacGuffin is. And then Indy unwraps it to take the guns away and then wraps it again. Like, why just have it sort of like do it randomly when you need it? Because then it feels like he's not in control of it and he's not outsmarting them. It just feels like luck.
I was going to say, I love I do think this movie, one compliment I will give it is, especially comparatively to some sequels we've had recently, such as Solo, etc. Mm-hmm. This movie handles nostalgia really well. So what I mean by that is, the scene where Indy lies in the plane exactly the way he's lied in previous movies and tips his hat over his head. Mm-hmm. The fact that we get the glimpse of the arc from Raiders in that room when a box gets knocked over, and it's not hit over the head. If you get the reference, you get the reference, but it doesn't harm the movie or impact the story the way they do some of the nostalgia in this movie, and it's done very well. You go, oh, that's cool. I was like, oh, that's the arc, nice, cool reference. I understood that reference, to quote Captain America. It wasn't harmful, it wasn't overboard, and it wasn't it wasn't deliberate. It wasn't nostalgia baiting. It was I thought that did, and it wasn't like bad fan service. I thought the way they handled the fan service, the nostalgia, the nods was actually really good in this movie.
I think Spielberg understood the iconography quite well too. Like the shot, they used it in the trailer, I think too. But the shot where you see Indy silhouetted against the car door, and he puts on the hat and straightens it, but you're just seeing it in silhouette. Mwah, beautiful, great shot. Gets the one exception, kicks that nostalgia in, because you're like, that's Indy, it's the hat, it's wearing the hat.
The obvious exception to everything I've just said, and the you said following it, is of course the Mary relationship, which is handled badly.
Oh, the Marion relationship.
The Marion, yeah, I think it's because Shia LaBeouf calls her Mary at first, and that's how they hide the twist and stuff.
Yes, of course he does. Yeah, because that's how they hide her identity. Again, what the fucking the hoops they have to jump through to make that twist work, and it's not even worth it. Yes, yeah. The Marion relationship in this is just bonkers. It's I hate you. Oh, he made gooey eyes at me. Oh, or he said a sweet thing, and now I love him again.
But it's so out of character when he said, it's a nice line and Harrison Ford delivers it well, but they weren't you, honey. I was like, that's so out of character for Indiana Jones. Like, it doesn't work for that reason.
And the thing is, the line doesn't bother me too much, because even I'm willing to go, all right, 15, 20 years, whatever has passed, in those years, he's realized that while he slept with and had relationships with many women, she was actually the one he genuinely had feelings for, and he didn't appreciate that while he had it, and now it's gone, right? I'm willing to go with, in his older age, Indy is finally willing to accept that that's how he feels about her. But her switch, I cannot buy. I don't believe Marion, who in the first movie felt abandoned by Indy and he won her back over again, and then we know he abandoned her again, would ever bother with him again.
Seemingly at the altar, or as good as.
Yeah, right. Why would she ever give that guy another chance? Ever. He's done it to her twice now. She's such a strong character, and she's such a fierce sort of does things her way character. I find it really hard to believe. Like, really hard to believe. So, yeah. It's and you normally we do a full character analysis of these characters, but there's nothing to them. They're cardboard cutouts that blow over in the wind. There's nothing to say. Marion's character arc is she's mad at Indy, right? And then she's not.
Well, it's
that's all she does in the movie. And the John Hurt's character. John Hurt's character, he's insane, and then he's not.
Her arc is the same as the first movie, but not done as well.
Well, not done at all, hardly. I mean, it's like they've got point A and they've got point, C, but they just people will figure out B. I guess. B kind of exists.
The John Hurt one as well, like you just said, just he's crazy, then he's not. But you know what? You know what's less effective about that? We didn't meet him before he was crazy. So that doesn't mean anything to us. I did
none of these. You know what? That's what it is. None of these character arcs feel complete because they all skip step 2. They all go from this is where they are to this is where they've ended up without ever actually showing the change. That's exactly the problem. Mott Williams is the same. There's never a moment. This is why I was craving a scene where he learns to be brave or learns to be like his dad, in some way, because the movie starts him as being, as you said, kind of almost a little. Like cowardly, but like, not completely unwilling to get into a fight, but like, sets up a little bit like that. And then at the end of the movie, he's just sort of like in line to replace Indy, despite never having, shown an interest in adventuring, archaeology, any of that, right? Then you've got Marion who starts the movie hating Indy and at the end doesn't, and it's like, that just happened. There's just a moment when that changes. Every single character has an A and a C position, and we never get to see how they got there. None of them. Literally 0 characters get any kind of development. They're one way at the beginning of the movie, they're another way at the end, and you don't feel like the adventure is what got them there.
Do you think it would have been better? Because I know they tried to get Sean Connery. So do you think if John Hurt's character was Sean Connery's Henry and actually Mutt didn't go and get Indy, Indy's looking for his father, Mutt's looking for his mother, they realise they're together, plot twist, his mother is Mariam. Sure. Like, do you think that works better? Because then at least we have more... We feel maybe more for that character because it's someone we already know. Maybe not that we feel anything. I think that's
I think that's workable. I don't know if that necessarily solves the issue as such, but that is a way more workable solution, or at least would have been more enjoyable, I think, than what we got here. Because I think what we've got here is just a movie insisting that these characters have been on journeys because they're different at the end. And not justifying why or how.
Some of those roles, Oxley, John Hurt, and Mac Ray Winston in particular, imagine how much worse it would have been if they didn't get those actors. Like, they are working with nothing, but there is a certain amount of charm that just comes from it being John Hurt and Ray Winston. Like, you get rid of that, like, it's just so much worse.
Yeah, agreed. There is a lot of charm they gain. There's a lot of bonus brownie points they gain by having cast so well. And look, when you're doing the 4th Indiana Jones movie, of course you just got presumably you've got the pick of the litter, right? Who's going to turn down an Indiana Jones movie? Like no one will turn that down. So this is the situation they found themselves in, which is that luxury, and but they benefit from that. 100% they did. No questions asked. That those characters were those characters. You paper over them with good acting or with fun performances, I should say, and the lack of character progression, the lack of any character work at all this movie does, sort of brushes over you. But yeah, it's just so flat. But I mean, where's the fun? For you, Dan. That's the other thing with this movie. Was any of this fun? Because I found this movie an absolute slog.
This wasn't my question, but we'll link that into the humour point because the jokes just don't land, don't feel like Indiana Jones. So there's a bit of fun at the beginning. There's a bit, I missed and all of that sort of stuff. That's fun, and the chase. We've both highlighted the library and that whole chase sequence. So there's fun there, but then it just absolutely goes. There's a portion of this movie which is literally just them looking around a cave, and it goes on for ages. Like, it's just not fun at all. Fire ants doing nothing.
Oh God, yeah. Let's talk about the fucking flesh-eating ants. Jesus Christ. So
they're not doing nothing. They're very much eating a load of flesh. But just the purpose, just there to be an action scene, there to be a visual, there to.
Oh, we need Indy going through a tomb at some point in this and solving sort of puzzles. Why? Because that's what they do. Will it have any relevance to this particular story? Will it need to be there? Will it help push the characters forward? Nah.
We had loads of bugs in Temple of Doom. All right, well, let's have fire ants in this one. Like, what?
Right. And I just think, it's just a collection of mishmash ideas that it doesn't come together at all. It's so weird. I don't know what secret sauce is missing other than... The most obvious thing I can point to is how the characters are handled, I think.
I think it's the script. And
then the other thing I think comes down to the overdoing it with the action... going big instead of keeping it small scale and focused on Indy's immediate goals and survival. Because if you look at all the other movies, the biggest scale action scene from any of the other trilogy, Christ, the tank. But that's just, there's a man that Indy wants to retrieve in the tank. So it's just him on a horse trying to get in and onto a tank. Nothing the scale of a nuclear explosion or
or a big alien spaceship.
The scale is too much. You lose Indy in it and you lose believability in it. So between the lack of character development and the action scenes being too big for their own good, and then you add that the jokes don't really work, that's 3 of your main Indiana Jones ingredients just flushed down a toilet. That's just you failed.
It also doesn't look like an Indiana Jones movie. It's way too polished. Everything's just a bit too clean. There's not enough grit and dust to it. Color palette wise, it's brighter than the other movies, and it just from a cinematography point of view, it doesn't feel like the other movies either.
Now that's interesting because I didn't have that so much. I do have some issues with the way some of it's shot because I think some of it is shot in a surprisingly generic way for Spielberg. I always like that Spielberg chooses interesting ways to depict things. In Jurassic Park, he doesn't just choose to have the shot of the 2 kids as you hear the goof, goof, goof of the oncoming dinosaur. He decides to shoot it in a way that depicts it in the puddle in the ground in its paw print rippling, and then the cup in the car. He has interesting shot choices in that movie, and I feel like in this movie it's just generic coverage a lot of the time. He rarely makes the most interesting shot choice in the whole movie is the silhouette of Indy at the beginning, and that's because that's the introduction of the character, and it feels like he put a bit more thought into that than anything else. But the rest of this movie is just shot in a really sort of uninspired, kind of bland way, almost like he sleepwalked through the production on this. I'm not suggesting he necessarily did. I just feel like he played it a bit safe, and I don't feel like the other Indiana Jones movies were shot in a particularly safe way. I feel like he took risks and put the camera in interesting places and framed things in some odd ways. Or even when he was doing more generic coverage, there was a kinetic energy to it. Maybe it was the editing. I don't know. Whatever it is, it's missing here. So many of the things that you want for an Indiana Jones movie are missing here.
Do you want to take a stroll now? We're going to take a stroll to Nitpick Corner, but I have to say it's
a stroll, so I don't need to put on any comfortable shoes. I can do this in my normal.
Because I think it's a proportionate Nitpick Corner in that this would be a much bigger problem in any other movie, but in a movie full of such massive problems, this becomes a nitpick. Like, what I'm about to say literally is a huge problem, but it's just that the movie's got,
so
Grand
we've already
Canyon-sized
travelled to It's Fucked Avenue, and Nitpick Corner is actually about 2 feet from that. So instead of travelling to Nitpick Corner, we're basically 1 block away from Nitpick Corner anyway.
hence the stroll. Hence why it's a stroll.
Got it. On board. Yes.
Dan.
Yes.
What happened to those FBI agents? And if the answer's nothing, what was the fucking point?
Mate. So, here's... Oh, God. This is another thing where the movie was trying to do something with the character, and it was setting up the start of a beat, and then didn't finish the beat. The beginning of the movie...
But again, that really... Why did no one go, guys, if we're going to drop this thread... We really need to reshoot and remove it from the movie.
Yeah, agreed. So for those who don't recall why Chris is talking about the FBI and going, this movie was like Russians, wasn't it? We'll talk more about the villains in a minute because we haven't really done that yet. But the movie's opening has Indy getting caught up in a thing where the Russians steal steal something from the Americans, and because Indy's partner betrays him, Ray Winston's character, whose name I keep forgetting, Mac, thank you, betrays him. They then, the American government suspect, because it's set in the build-up to the Cold War, they suspect everyone, like America did at the time. There were a lot of people accused of being Russian spies. That was and again, I understand why they've put this in here. This is like the nuclear thing, like the greaser thing. They're like, hey, it's the 50s. We need things from the 50s, and Soviet fear mongering and fear of Russian spies was a thing, right? So the premise is, because Indy's partner turned on him, the American government are now investigating Indy for potentially being a spy, which loses him his job. And if you're thinking, wow, there's some stakes for Indy, that'll be a thing that he needs to resolve across the movie, prove himself innocent. Maybe that'll be part of the thrust of why he's on this adventure, despite his age. No, it's literally never mentioned again. They don't even necessarily confirm he got his job back, right, at the end of the movie. Or if he does have his job back, they never explain how or why.
So he's associate dean by the end of the movie.
That's right. So how?
And the FBI agents are the ones chasing him and Shire when they're still in the US, and it looks like they're going to follow them at one point, and then they're just not seen again or looped back to. It's madness.
It's insane. Absolutely insane.
Just absolute madness. You got anything else?
Well, let's talk quickly about the villains. I think Cate Blanchett is doing a serviceable job for an underwritten villain. She is one note, uninteresting. Bad guy wants MacGuffin. That's all she is. Simple. Bad guy wants MacGuffin. Anything to add?
No. Bad guy wants MacGuffin for knowledge, and like all Indy villains, she's she falls by her own sword, I suppose. So they're consistent with that. But she also survives. Oh, mate, how have we not? Fucking hell! Do you remember when the villains get hit by the rebounding tree after Marion drives the car onto it, and it swats them? This movie's bad, man.
I forgot about that.
There's she's got an indispensable army. That's a bit annoying. We keep fire ants and fucking trees swatting them and just explosions. And she's just always got an entire team with her. Yeah. It's bad. It's bad. And then Ray Winston's Mac is dropping tracker pellets, and it's bad. It's bad.
Yeah, I think there's too much CGI in the action. They got too excited by the modern technology elements. And it made them go, oh, we can do all this stuff that's bigger, and that's what led them to down this problem of scale issue. Let's hope that in Dial of Destiny there's a better understanding of how Indiana Jones's action needs to function. The trailers certainly make me feel like in Mangold we trust But we'll see, I guess.
Yeah, although like after watching this and discussing it, I am like there's the scene where he's in the subway on the horse, and I'm like, I hope there's a reason for that. Do you know what I mean? I hope he's not just in the subway on a horse because it looks cool.
Right. Yes. We'll find out, I suppose.
Yeah.
There's one of the lines in this movie is one of the best pieces of dialogue in any of the quadrilogy, I suppose. It's a brilliant line, and it is well out of place in what is otherwise a terrible, terrible movie. But one of the characters, I forget which character, I assume. No, it's not Oxley. It's Broadbent's character, Charles Stanforth. Who says to Indy, "We seem to have reached the age where life stops giving us things and starts taking them away." What a beautiful line.
Yeah, and I thought I really liked that they paid tribute to. I mean, literally, I'm so sorry if people can hear the drilling. If Dan can't hear it on the headphones, it's a good sign. Yeah, that's a hopeful sign that it's not going to appear on the mic. But anyway,
okay. So I've just turned my headphones up to maximum. And I can slightly hear it under you, but it's fine.
Okay.
If it's there, look, it's there. You've already apologised for it. People will know what it is. It's not going to be over. Yeah. People should still be able to hear your voice, and that's all that matters. Like if there's a bit of an annoying underneath it, we'll just have to live with that. It's that or we don't record. Yeah. So I'm guessing if they're listening to this, they were looking forward to hearing us drive ourselves insane watching this movie. And in a weird way, Chris, I feel it's appropriate there's a drilling sound underneath the entire of this, making it a little bit unpleasant to listen to, because I think that's really indicative of the movie we just watched. Carry on.
I can't. I'll come back to the disappointment, but what was I making a point about?
We were talking about Jim Broadbent's character and that line about.
Oh, I like the fact. Yeah, I like the fact. So, Jim Broadbent, I always like him on screen. His character's wasted in this. It doesn't need to be Jim Broadbent, but fine.
Yeah, if you're going to have a character like that, and you can convince an actor of Jim Broadbent's caliber to play such a small role, then you would, wouldn't you?
Yeah, exactly. I like the fact that they took that opportunity to pay tribute to, I presume, the actor who played Marcus, who had also passed. I like they could have just made it about Henry. I like the fact that they paid tribute.
Yeah,
to
what's crazy is the character. He wasn't even. He hadn't. He hadn't even passed yet. Sean Connery. He was just retired and didn't want to come out of retirement.
Yeah. So I liked the fact that they paid tribute in that way. Yeah. Kind of, unless you've got any more specific notes, what we lent into then, I can't. It didn't need to be. It is, and I don't know if this is because of the reputation. I think the thing that's so insanely disappointing, the thing that makes the drilling appropriate, is, I'll be honest with you, this movie could have been bad. And I would, and given the enjoyment of the first three and knowing it had a bad reputation, if this movie had just been bad, I'd be sat here going, I went along for the ride. It's not good, but I still enjoyed it. It was fine. Like, it's not as bad as people say. I can't tell you how bad it could have been and still would have gotten a pass from me. Still would have gotten you should complete the set, or Shire's not brilliant, but it's fine. Like, it honestly, it could have been really bad and I still would have enjoyed it and tried to find an argument of it's not as bad as people think it is. Check it out. But this movie is really terrible. Like, it's really bad. Like, there's gophers or whatever you called them, like inexplicably watching
the prairie
train
dogs
go past. Like, it's really, really bad, and nothing is grounded in character stuff. It's not funny. It's overblown for the sake of being overblown. It is literally, I think, the worst execution of what a sequel to Indiana Jones years later could have been. And I really fucking hope Dial of Destiny is good.
But the thing is, the bar is so low, right? Dial of Destiny, and I touch wood because this is always the curse saying something like this. But how the odds of Dial of Destiny being worse or the same as this are pretty low, right? Even if Dial of Destiny isn't the glorious, belated sequel we've always wanted. Even if it isn't all the stuff we're hoping and imagining it might be. it's got to be better than this, right?
Yeah, because I just hope they learn the right.
In a few months' time, but
I hope they learn the right lessons from this. And the lesson for me is ground everything in character, ground it in realism. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it's amazing how bad Marvel and DC this movie felt. Like, you know, with the quips and the, you know, it feels like there's we are inches away from a sky beam at the end of this movie. And we kind of have a sky beam in you know, the way Cate Blanchett's character is destroyed.
Yep.
It's not that series. It's not that movie. Like what? Like how have we got generic superhero content in an Indiana Jones movie? Like and Indiana Jones has never, because they also do that by the kind of ignoring of the fact that he's older. And it's like, but these movies were about him being too old in 1989 or whenever the first one came out. And this one came out in 2008. And you're going to sort of pretend, other than a few jokes about his age at the beginning with Mac? It's really bad. It's a really bad movie.
Yeah. And I think as well, like, that opening sequence, as much as we said we didn't mind that one, there are a lot of, like, weird moments of Indiana Jones being a little maybe too bumbling, falling over stuff, doing some kind of odd slapstick comedy. Like, there's that... Harrison Ford is too cool to pull off that stuff, particularly the bit at the end where he sort of stumbles over that bike. I was like, this isn't indie.
But not only is it not indie, actually, as a, you know, it is potentially a choice, though. It is potentially... okay, well, he's older. But they forget about that later on when he's jumping into cars and sliding out of car doors. And when he's, do you know what I mean? When he's racing through the jungle. And
right.
Actually, you know, so they, not only does it not feel like indie, it's also not then a choice. It's just servicing that scene. I did like... There's one really good moment in that action sequence we've not talked about where Indy is driving the car and it's driving towards the car Mac is in, and Mac's going, "You don't know him. Don't think you're gonna, like, you don't know him. You don't know him." Like, basically saying he's just gonna fucking plow into us. Yeah. Like, you don't know the man. You're not going to win this game of chicken.
Yeah. Another moment that I thought was okay was I do enjoy Somewhere Your Grandpa Is Laughing. That's a nice moment. I didn't like the hat blowing in to Mutt's feet at the end of the movie. That's too on the nose. I didn't hate that then Indy picks it up and is like, "Not yet, kid," or whatever. But no, on the whole, no. I don't mind the idea that the aliens were sort of archaeologists of their own. It's not a terrible idea, but fine. But here's the thing as well. Perfect. I forgot I'd written this. So in summary, I think another issue, like in general, that sums up a lot of what's wrong with this movie. They aren't saving children. They're not stopping Nazis. They're not really stopping the Russians. They just have similar goals and keep clashing. So what is my motivation to invest in this plot? I'm not invested in the adventure, nor do I understand why Indy is.
Yeah.
Once they've retrieved Marion, I don't know what his investigation his motivation for continuing to investigate and push.
I think
here is.
I think it's partly. Well, at that point, he's communicated with the alien skull himself, hasn't he? So he says he's got to put it back because it told him to. There's dialogue about that. Obviously, I'm not right. saying it's good. I'm just answering your question. Like, it's thin. It's poorly executed. The reason the movie gives is the skull tells him to put the skull back, and obviously there's Oxley's character as well. Which again, if we were invested more in that character, I think that's why they try and make it clear that him and Indy had a relationship before. But it's all too thin, you know. The skull telling him to do it, and the Oxley character, it's too thin. It doesn't. The reason you forgot about those things or hadn't considered them is because it's executed so badly.
Yeah. I tell you one thing they did execute reasonably well, Chris. Very quickly, because I just found this in my notes and forgot to mention it. I liked Mutt fencing and sword fighting. I know some people will think that was too far. I think that was just on the line for an indie movie, and I think they established it. Earlier in the movie, they talked about that he'd been doing fencing at school, which means later in the movie when the villain has a sword and he grabs a sword and they have a little sword fight, I was on board. I was like, that's his thing. Indy's got the whip, Mutt's got the sword. I'm cool with that. Unique, distinct, potentially interesting in an action scene versus just, guns. Separates him from his dad but makes him unique on his own. I was okay with it. I was more okay with him stood on the top of a car, sword fighting someone stood on the top of another car, than I was him swinging through the trees by quite some way.
I was going to say, Mutt's also got the vines, baby. Mutt's not just about fencing. Mutt's about swinging through the jungle.
Yeah. So yeah, the biggest problem I think in the whole of the movie is just execution and quality. There's when there's action, it's a mix of passable to poor. When it's comedy, it's hit or miss. The character work is flat. It's all just executed poorly. I don't think any of these ideas on their own are a problem, but I think when you execute them with this little interest in doing it or exploring any of it, then I think you end up with a movie that plays like this one does, which is poorly.
I got one comment and one question.
Sure.
Right?
And then we'll move on to Trev.
John Williams, for anyone screaming it. Yeah, John, the music's good. It's not as epic. It's not that as emotive, partly because of the shocking work around it. Even little things like not having, the logo in the font and stuff like that. But John Williams is good, but I don't think it's as emotive or impactful. Not necessarily his fault. You could argue if you wanted it's his fault and the music isn't as strong, but but John Williams is John Williams, so therefore it is to some degree amazing, as always. Here's my... I assume you agree with that.
Yeah, I was just about to say agreed. I mean, the John Williams score is always reliable.
Yeah. Here's my question for you, Dan. And it's potentially... Let's try not to make it too big going into Triv, but here's my question for you. My final question. Maybe. I don't know. I'm building it up now. I shouldn't. Do you think Harrison Ford is good in this movie?
That's a great question. I think Harrison Ford is as good as the material allows him to be in this movie. I think it feels like a weaker performance because this character is written weaker. I reckon he's giving it a real go. Harrison Ford, it strikes me as the kind of, either gives it his all or cannot be fucked with your production and doesn't know why he's there. Now give him his paycheck and get out of his way sort of actor. And I feel like on Star Wars, it's always been, give me my paycheck and get me the fuck out of here. And I feel like on Indiana Jones, it's always been, I'm very invested in making this work and doing this right. His insistence on doing stunts, which we've talked about in the past, and was definitely a factor in this movie as well, tells me he was invested and really was committed to doing it. The reason it might feel slightly flatter in this movie, in my opinion, is a result of weak writing more than him not being invested or giving a great performance. I think this is as good as a performance as you can get with that script.
Yeah, I think that's fair because moments like none of them were you, honey, or whatever he says. Like, my issue with that is not his delivery. He delivers it very well. And like you say, her reaction is more of a problem. I think the script has let him down, and actually editing decisions. I watched a trailer for this movie and really liked a moment where you're a teacher part-time moment. Watch the trailer and then reference it to the film. The trailer uses an alternative take that is better, and the film that version in the film is just like part-time. There's just a bit more like pronunciation and grit on the version in the trailer. I think poor choices were also made.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people were clearly trying very hard here, but I think the script really you were just off on the wrong foot from minute one. I think there's not really much salvaging that script, sadly. I don't know what happened. I don't know if it was rushed. I don't know if they just thought it was fine. and then it didn't because it's Indiana Jones. It's just a fun adventure movie. No one will think about it too hard. Don't worry about it too much. Excuse me. Which I think is a foolish path to go down thought wise. So yeah, we're not recommending. Don't worry about it. Hopefully, Dial of Destiny will be better. I mean, for some of you, this will be coming out around the time of Dial of Destiny, so you'll already know if Dial of Destiny has turned out to be a shit show or a masterpiece or something in the middle, more likely. So laugh at us for either getting it right or wrong. I guess here.
I've just realised that I want to make it. I could let this slide, because no one's gonna care. But I guilt's eating me up. I've just had a realization, Dan. That trailer point, I had noticed it, but I believe I listened to a review this morning by Chris Stuckman, I think, and I think he pointed that out. So I want to give him credit for that observation.
Fair
I've
enough.
just realised that.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I agree. I don't recommend watching it even for completionist's sake because it's so bad. I was so thrown by how bad this movie is.
Yeah, I think that really does indicate how poor it is because I think, you were ready to just slog through something not great and still be like, I had fun.
Like I said earlier, I was absolutely an easy get for this movie.
Imagine
it was
being in
an
that
easy
position
win
and still
for
being
me.
disappointed.
Yeah, not even disappointed, just bamboozled by the fridge scene. There were just key moments where I was like, what the fuck is going on? The fridge scene, the spaceship.
Yeah.
Just maddening.
Yeah. All right, let's triv it up.
Let's find out a bit about how it happened. Let's triv it up!
I'm going to give you some trivia. Right. So, for anyone who's just joined us, by the way, on this season rewind reviews, and it's like, why do they always say exactly the same thing? Chris says trivia it up, Dan says to give you some trivia. I don't know. We just got into a thing where that's what we do. I don't have an explanation. It's just what happens. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how it started, and I don't know how to stop. And very much like this movie, I don't want to stop. I'm just going to keep going. I'm just going to keep going until you give up. In the year 2000, Spielberg's personal interest for another Indiana Jones movie was ignited when his son asked him when the remaining 2 Indiana Jones movies would be released. In 2006, Harrison Ford declared that if this movie was not made by 2008, then filmmakers should just drop the idea altogether. This got Spielberg looking for a good script immediately. Shame he didn't find one. Harrison Ford was adamant that he got to wield Indiana's famous whip practically on set. Paramount executives had wanted the weapon to be computer generated because of movie safety rules, but Ford branded the rule ridiculous. Yeah, I go with that.
Yeah, but how was other stuff in this movie not branded ridiculous?
Yeah, we got a practical whip. We didn't get practical much else, did we? Harrison Ford convinced writer David Koepp to include more jokes about Indy's age in the script, believing it would help reduce the American paranoia about aging. He also refused to dye his hair for the role, arguing Indy's appeal wasn't his youth, but his imagination and resourcefulness. My ambition in action is to have the audience look straight in my face and not the back of a stuntman's head. I hope to continue that no matter how old I get. I do respect Harrison Ford very much, and I think he's exactly right about what's good about Indiana Jones. It's his imagination and resourcefulness. That's a very good way to explain it. He doesn't get out of situations because he's the biggest or the strongest, because there's multiple scenes in all these movies where he fights big guys who are much more physically imposing than him, and he wins by outsmarting them, outwitting them in the moment. So I think that's a good observation, and I think maybe they should have let him write the fucking script. But hey, when filming the scene when Indiana drives a truck through a wall, things actually did not go as planned. The timed explosives had been used, but one of the explosives failed to go off and landed in the seat next to Harrison Ford. Luckily, it didn't then go off. Obviously, it stayed not going off and then was removed safely. But that could have been a really nasty accident. So yeah, I'm glad that we didn't lose Harrison Ford to that, because that could have been a really nasty accident. Several weeks into production, Harrison Ford saw a blonde woman on the set and asked who she was. Someone told her that was actually Cate Blanchett, who he'd never seen out of costume, and he'd simply mixed her up because he'd only recognised her with the black wig. That made me chuckle. Ford kept himself in such good shape over the years that his costume measurements for this movie had not changed an inch from those used in Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade. He performed many of his own stunts because stunt technology had become safer since 1989, and he felt doing the stunts improved his performance. What a fucking Chad.
That is phenomenal. Well done, Harrison.
Mm-hmm. Gotta love that guy, right? Sean Connery was indeed approached for a cameo appearance, also a cameo appearance, as Henry Jones Sr., but he turned it down, finding retirement too enjoyable. George Lucas later stated, in retrospect, it was good that Jones Sr. did not appear, as it would have disappointed the audience that he didn't come along on the adventure. I actually agree with that. I think that's right. I think if he shows up in the start of the movie, you kind of expect him to join. I think there's a truth.
Yeah, but I do think there's a world where the John Hurt character could have been Sean Connery, depending on Sean Connery's availability,
that's not
health,
what they,
etc.
That's not what they offered him, though. They offered him a cameo, and he turned that down. If they'd offered him a larger role, one where he's on the adventure in some degree, like the John Hurt role, that's a little different. But yeah, I agree with you. That would have potentially worked a lot better. Harrison Ford also joked that he was getting old enough to play his own father now, so Sean Connery wasn't needed anymore. Speaking of cameos, John Rhys-Davies was approached to reprise his character Salah in a brief cameo at the wedding scene. He turned this down because he felt that just having Salah appear as a member of a crowd would cheat the audience and cheapen the character. Good for you, John Rhys-Davies. Your character should have been in this movie properly.
Yep, and evidently, I think from what we said the other week, is in the sequel, so that's exciting.
Yes, looking forward to that. So, many characters that are absent from this movie are, of course, referenced in Indy's office. So, the obvious ones that are seen pretty much front and centre frame, there's a picture of Marcus, played by Denholm Elliott, and Henry Jones Sr., of course, played by Sean Connery, shown prominently on Indiana's desk. Both those images are from around the Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade era. They look like they did in that movie. But, more difficult to spot, there is a photograph of Indy and Salah, from Raiders of the Lost Ark on the fireplace mantle. There's also a picture of Willie Scott, played by Kate Capshaw from Temple of Doom, that can be seen in the background on a cupboard when Indiana is talking to Mutt Williams. She's wearing the red dress that she wore at Club Obi-Wan in the start of Temple of Doom. There's also a doctored photograph of a young... So I don't know why I said it like that. A doctored photograph... A doctored photograph of a young Sean Connery and River Phoenix, briefly seen, obviously in Last Crusade, on the table. So there's a doctored photograph to show young Sean Connery with young Indy, and they use River Phoenix to play young Indy, and it's visible on a small table as Dean Stanforth, played by Jim Broadbent, enters the room. So that's a good one. Speaking of...
Yeah, that's nice, because that feels like it was paying tribute to River Phoenix as well, which is nice.
Yes, there was talk apparently that this movie might get, attributed to him, at the end, in tribute, in memory of. But I guess the feeling was, because he only played a small role in the previous one, dedicating the whole movie to him felt a bit odd, so it didn't end up happening. But I think that would have been nice. But yeah, I still like that there's a nice little reference to River Phoenix. This is a good one. So obviously, Kate Capshaw, who played Willie Scott in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, went on to marry Steven Spielberg, as we talked about during that podcast. Now, those two did have children together. I don't know how many. It might just be the one, but they have a daughter called Sasha Spielberg, and she's in this movie. She is the lady who punches Mutt Williams. So I like the idea that Kate Capshaw and Steven Spielberg's real daughter gets to appear in an Indiana Jones movie and gets to punch Indiana Jones' son. I think that's lovely. There's just something very full circle about that I really enjoyed.
Yeah, that's nice.
Now, following a piece of trivia from the previous episode, I think the first of these movies, we talked about how the German accents were so bad, because it was Americans doing German accents and German dialects, that they had to redub them when the movie was released in Germany just so they wouldn't get laughed out of cinemas. Well, apparently Spielberg learnt his lesson, because in this movie he insisted they cast actual Russian actors in the role of the Russian soldiers, so their accents and dialects would be authentic. I think probably wise. Good work, Spielberg. Yeah. This is a good one. So the nuclear bomb tests that Indiana Jones found himself in is loosely based on Operation Teapot, which is an atomic bomb test that were conducted in Nevada in 1955. So most notable detail from the real thing that ended up being in this is the use of buildings and mannequins to observe the destructive force of the explosion on, objects and people. It wasn't quite... I've seen pictures and footage. I went and Googled it to have a look myself. In this, it's a lot more detailed. Like, they're on the lawn. Like, there's, running water coming out of, a hose. He's, washing his car when it goes off. In the house, there's, a lot of furniture, including a TV that's on, which all adds to the creepiness of the scene when Indy steps into it. But they didn't quite go that far for the real-life version. There was some mild furniture in the homes that they built, but the homes were built sort of cheap, and the furniture was minimal. It was more for, overall overviewing stuff rather than what are the effects of nuclear bombs on a television that's on? So they wouldn't have gone to that level of detail. But
because you're right. Why is the television on? Do you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I'll tell you why the television's on, Dan. Because it services the scene and makes it you get to have the reveal where Indy thinks they're real people and they're not. That's why the television's on. Doesn't matter that it doesn't make any fucking sense. It's servicing the scene.
Yep. Agreed. Yeah. Exactly right. And that seems to be the attitude across the movie. The announcements and countdown preceding the explosion are based on the Ivy Mike test of 1952, which was the very first detonation of a hydrogen bomb. Most notably, the part of the warning that reads, "Do not remove goggles or face to blast until 10 seconds after first light." So, yeah, there you go. Right, so now we get to, we could do a whole trivia section on just Shia LaBeouf as a lunatic, but I've got one particular one. It's a little long, but it says a lot. It's a lot of people quoting each other about what was done here, but okay. When they were doing press junkets for this movie, Spielberg famously told Shia LaBeouf not to pick his nose in public. Now...
Did he have a habit of doing that? Or?
No, I can't tell if that's a euphemism or not, Chris, for being honest about the movie in public, or if that literally means picking his nose. Because the rest of this trivia is very much about LaBeouf criticising this movie. So LaBeouf criticised the movie to the press several times after it came out. I feel like I dropped the ball on the legacy that people loved and cherished. You get to monkey swinging and things like that, and you can blame it on the writer or you can blame it on Steve, but it's the actor's job to make it come alive and make it work, and I couldn't do that, so it's my fault. Simple. Now, I appreciate him trying to blame himself for that. It's absolutely not your fault, Shia. You're not great in this movie, to be honest with you, but you're far from... The fact we haven't even talked about your performance, I wouldn't worry about it, buddy. You're quite far down on a very long list of things that are wrong with this movie. But he later went on.
I don't think it's his fault at all.
Yeah, look, he's not great in the movie, but no one is, because the script's not good. So it's we'll never know how good he could have or might not have been. Maybe if the script was really good, he would have stood out as one of the worst things in the movie. Maybe. As it stands, yeah, he's least of my worries. He then went later on to say that this destroyed his relationship with Spielberg. LaBeouf revealed that his Kingdom of the Crystal Skull comments deeply ruptured his relationship with Spielberg. He told me there's a time to be a human being, and there's a time to have an opinion, and there's a time to sell cars. LaBeouf said at the time, "It brought me freedom, but it also killed my spirits because this was a dude I looked up to like a sensei." Ford apparently called Shia LaBeouf a fucking idiot for criticizing the movie to the press. The exact quote is, "I think he was a fucking idiot. As an actor, it's my obligation to support the film without making a complete ass of myself. It's no... What's that, sorry?
I just said, oh, wow. That's...
Yeah, it's no surprise then that after all this, LaBeouf was fired from Indiana Jones franchise. A recent article about the franchise made this clear. Shia LaBeouf will not be returning as Mutt Williams in the upcoming 5th Indiana Jones film.
The only shame of it is I hate when behind-the-scenes stuff, be it or external stuff, shall we say, so response to the movie, the actor, etc. I'm willing to bet Mutt Williams as a character is just getting ignored in the new movie and potentially marry him too. And I'm kind of like, you literally ended this film with him having a family. For someone that doesn't know the externals, going from that movie to a movie that ignores that is gonna be weird. Maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe there will be a reference, but I think, do you know what I mean? You can't just. Sometimes when it's a franchise and an ongoing story, I'm not sure how much you can just sweep it under the rug.
Yeah,
within the story.
I would agree with that. Yeah, I would very much agree with that. I thought this was interesting, right? So in modern days, Chris, movie gets delivered to a theatre, and it's got a digital key that unlocks it a few hours or maybe a day before the release, and they do this to protect spoilers, but to stop the movie theatres from running it early, things like that. This movie was delivered to theatres, obviously, on canisters, because this was back in the day of they were still, not 100% digital. The canisters were locked behind a combination lock, and the combination was not provided to theatres until the day of the first showing.
Wow.
Yeah, literally, bolted, which I guess you could cut through, but you wouldn't want to risk it. You wouldn't want to damage the film. Code names for the movie were Bandwagon and Turbo. Code names for movies are a bad idea, by the way. Like they don't help. Like no one ever is tricked by them, ever.
Yeah, that's very weird.
So no one's ever like, oh, I've never Turbo. It's gonna be whatever big movie is out that week. According to George Lucas, a George Lucas interview from the special effects documentary included on the DVD, the concept for the giant flesh-eating ants was lifted directly from an abandoned script for Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. I would say sometimes things are abandoned for a reason.
I would echo that notion.
It's mistakenly often cited that the jungle chase scene was filmed entirely in front of blue screen. In fact, the entire sequence was filmed in a real jungle. CGI was only used to add a few plants and erase areas of the ground to create the cliffsidey effect. That's mad, because I don't know what they've done that makes that scene look so CGI. Obviously, the swinging through the trees is completely CGI, but it does feel like a CGI forest, doesn't it?
Yeah, the movie in general just feels very CGI. Like I say, it's not as gritty. It's not as raw as the other Indiana Jones movies. It doesn't, even though they seemingly did a lot of things practically, you referenced Ford doing stunts, etc. It doesn't feel like a practical movie, whereas the others absolutely feel like practical effects.
Yeah. Yes, agreed. 100% agreed. In an interview with Empire Magazine in October 2011, Spielberg admitted that he never liked the MacGuffin of this movie. It was George Lucas's idea, and Spielberg only put it in the movie due to his friendship. And he said in that interview, I am loyal to my best friend. When he writes a story he believes in, even if I don't believe in it, I'm going to shoot the movie the way George envisioned it. And there it is, everyone. He made a movie he doesn't believe in.
I'm sorry, I'm not, obviously Spielberg's a fucking legend, more of a legend than I'll ever be. But I'm sorry, that's picking your nose in public as well. Like Ford can criticize Shia, it's the duty to stand by it. I'm not saying Spielberg has to stand by the movie. Spielberg can go, yeah, there was some stuff about aliens that just didn't work, but you hold your hands up as well. I'm sorry, don't be like, oh well, I'm loyal to my friend and it was his idea, nothing to do with me. You directed it, you put it out there. Fuck, you are responsible as well. Whether the seed of the idea, whether the notion, whether the idea came from you is irrelevant. Your name is on the fucking movie. I think it's shitty to be like, oh no, look over there, it was his fault. And maybe that's the truth, but again, part of that responsibility is to take, you take the praise, you also take the negative. I don't think that's great of him to. I think he's picking his nose in public there, personally.
Yeah, I mean, I think as well. I guess there is a difference to like. I mean, it sounds like Shia was shitting on the movie during the press tour for the movie, whereas I guess Spielberg. A slight defense is that's obviously several years later, post the movie's release, a bit more in hindsight, but still, I agree. Whether he literally meant that about Shia LaBeouf picking his nose in public, or if he meant that as an analogy, and I like it better as an analogy, and I hope that's what it means. Yeah, he's definitely doing it there because he's passing the buck as well as shitting on the movie from a great height. He's managing to do both.
Like, I love as well, like, the element of it of, I'm loyal to my friend. Let me just push him under this bus, though. But I'm loyal, guys. I'm a loyal person.
Who you didn't like about the movie? That was his fault, not mine.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it just feels a bit shitty to me. And look, maybe, out of context, etc. Because it's like, and I don't know. This is I haven't had a place to rant about this, and every time I've seen it mentioned, I've wanted to. So I'm ranting about it here. Don't know the context. Don't know the interview. Maybe it was very humble. Maybe someone else found out about it and asked him about it. But James Corden talking about how there was a version of The Whale that he was going to do. Fuck off. Like, Brendan Fraser's having his moment. Fucking, I was at one point I was going to do that movie. Well, you fucking didn't. Brendan Fraser did, and he fucking has got all the trophies for it. Like I say, don't know the context. Corden might have been asked directly, and to be fair, I did see one clip where he was very like, that was a very different movie to the movie they produced. And the movie they produced, absolutely, Brendan Fraser was the man for. But just don't even fucking talk about it then. Don't talk about a part that was nearly yours that you didn't get. Don't talk about how there was a bad idea in something that your fucking name is on and it was someone else's idea. Like, yeah, that's my rant over. Carry on with the truth.
I saw a great clip recently that really cemented my James Corden as a piece of shit to the point where I was just like, it's so perfect. He was doing that. Was it some? It's like fill your guts or spill your guts or something. Is that it? It's like he does. It's a game where he has to tell the truth or eat a gross thing. And he's on it with another talk show presenter. One of the Jimmys, maybe? I can't remember. But the guy says, tell us the names of one of the crew in this room. And James Corden can't answer, and he has to eat the thing. And I was just like, yeah, that guy's a piece of shit. Anyway, back to the trivia, Chris.
I will say with that, though, because I never know with those things whether in his head, and I'm not defending because there's a lot of things not to fucking defend about James Corden, but I never know with that game whether in his head he's going, at some point, someone needs to eat something or this bit doesn't work. Do you know what I mean? So I don't know. I'd have to rewatch the clip, but I don't know if that's a case of I don't. It's not that I don't want to answer this. It's that for the bit, someone's got to eat some gross shit.
He stumbles around a bit first before he commits to eating.
Okay, yeah, fine. I can't. I don't know.
There's a bit where he jokingly or half jokingly is like, "Oh, it's not my usual crew." Like, he's trying to talk his way around.
Right. Oh, in that case, then yeah.
It feels pretty apparent to me. And then he leans into it and eats it like it's a joke, like leans into it. But but yeah, it's not great, and it's probably true. And keep in mind, those questions for that game are probably written by his staff.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I'm not. Like I say, I've not seen the bit,
but yeah. Right. Disappointed fans have introduced the phrase "nuke the fridge" to the colloquial English language as a replacement for "jump the shark," referring to the scene when Indiana Jones survives a nuclear explosion by climbing into a fridge. Both terms refer to a series having surpassed its peak and is now getting close to absurdity. According to David Coep, the fridge scene was already in the third draft of the screenplay, which was written by Frank Darabont, and he liked it so much he kept it in the final draft. A lot of people blaming each other for this movie. And look, he said he liked it so much he kept it, so he's taken some ownership of it, but still, he's going like, that was Frank's idea. Don't ask me. Anyway.
So...
Yeah, I know. Before
I'm
keeping
sorry, You know, and you know what? Sorry, I'm looping back. And you know what? For anyone like, well, you know, it was really bad. It was really hated. These things. Fair play of people to put it out. You know what? It's part of the fucking money. It's part of the job. Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah, it's shitty to have to go, yeah, no, that was shit. And yeah, you might want a finger point. You are being paid a salary if you're in one of those positions where actually part of that salary is taking the hit sometimes and having to put your hands up, in my opinion.
Yeah, 100%. That's the job. No doubt. No doubt. So, bear with me. Here we go. Okay, so before Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was chosen as a title, several other titles were considered and even registered with the MPAA, including The City of Gods, so Indiana Jones and the City of Gods, Indiana Jones and the Destroyer of Worlds, Indiana Jones and the Fourth Corner of the Earth, Indiana Jones and the Lost City of Gold, Indiana Jones and the Quest for the Covenant, and then the one that apparently Lucas really liked. Let me find it. Oh, this one's slightly in a slightly different place. Hold for 1 second. There was a separate piece of trivia for Lucas's favorite one, and it was fucking terrible. It was so bad, Chris. It was like, wait, no, I'm not even going to say what it was like. I'm going to just read it. 1 second. Because this will only work better if I do it that way. And
while you're looking for it, the title we got is terrible though as well. Like, I think I mentally was referring to it as Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull, but obviously it's actually Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which is way too wordy.
Yeah, it is fairly wordy. It's definitely the wordiest of all of them, isn't it? Yeah, here we go. Yeah. He George Lucas's original choice for the title was Indiana Jones and the Saucer Men.
Yeah, also bad.
He also apparently enjoyed Indiana Jones and the Attack of the Giant Ants.
Jesus. I think just clean. Just Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull would have been better.
Yeah, agreed. Stunt coordinator Vic Armstrong, who had worked on the 3 previous Indiana Jones movies, we talked about him in the trivia for the previous ones, sadly was committed to making Mummy, the Tomb of the Dragon Empire, also a piece of shit sequel movie, and had to be replaced in this movie with Dan Bradley. However, Spielberg was able to meet Armstrong during War of the Worlds and talk about the various action sequences he'd conceived and sort of talk them through with him. So Vic Armstrong had some input into this movie. The final budget of this movie was $185 million, which makes it, believe it or not, Chris, to this day, this is still true, the most expensive movie Spielberg has ever made.
Wow.
Imagine this being the most expensive movie that he's like. That's you'd expect by now he would have cracked that, but yeah, that's the most expensive.
So this cost more than Ready Player One, or
yep.
Fucking hell.
Yep. I mean, look, 185 million is not nothing. But to be fair, and here's the thing, these movies always make money because, lo and behold, the return on investment, 800 million worldwide.
Yeah, but where I don't understand how. I guess there's not a name in Ready Player comparatively to Harrison Ford.
And Ready Player One was almost entirely CG.
Yeah, exactly. I don't understand how Ready Player One didn't cost more.
To be fair, it's close. Ready Player One, 175.
Wow.
They had very similar budgets. 175 for Ready Player One, 185 for Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. So Indiana Jones cost 10 million more.
Makes you wonder, doesn't it, how much Harrison Ford got?
It does a little. Good for him, though. I mean, he is indie. Right. Last couple of bits of trivia before we get out of here. This is the only Indiana Jones movie to be set entirely in the Western Hemisphere. Sure. John Cryer revealed... Cool. This one breaks my brain. John Cryer revealed, and stick with me, in 2020, that he'd originally...
Hold on. As in 2.5 Men, John Cryer?
Yes.
Right.
He revealed in 2020 that he'd auditioned for the role of Marty McFly in Back to the Future, 1985. That script that he'd read did not include the DeLorean and running on, plutonium. Instead, the climax of the film involved Marty sneaking into a nuclear test site and shielding himself from a nuclear blast by hiding in a refrigerator.
I think this came up in the Back to the Future trivia. Yeah.
Not only was Spielberg a producer on that film, but that is, but he met David Coep, the writer of this movie, through his relationship with Robert Zemeckis.
Which just backs up what we were talking about earlier. Someone wanted Indy to get in a fridge. And potentially Spielberg, someone wanted that scene, and they put that in this movie regardless of whether it made sense.
Yeah, and I feel like there was some attachment to the fridge thing that drifted through from Back to the Future and ended here.
Yeah.
Madness.
Yeah, badly.
Right. Mutt Williams was originally a nerdy kind of character, but George Lucas decided to make him Indiana's son and give him a rebellious character, reasoning that he needs to be what Henry Jones Sr. thought of his son, and the curse returns to Indiana in the form of his own son. He's everything a father can't stand. That makes more sense than what's in the movie, but that's not what they do. So, bad execution again, because they've not even achieved the thing that he's describing as what the goal was. So, yeah. Big fail. Right, I've got a new section, Chris, just called Bad Triv. This is just trivia where I'm like, I don't understand why this is trivia, and it made me laugh because I don't, apparently, Chris, and don't get me wrong, look, you'll be blown away. It turns out Karen Allen was not aware her character was in the script until director Steven Spielberg called her and told her. Yeah, that's how things work. Internet and writer of this trivia, people don't know that they're stuff until they're told stuff.
In the writer's defense, it's probably not that common for an entire script to be. You check availability before writing someone into the part, wouldn't you? In most cases, unless there's a deadline.
You might want to make sure that the script is close to being finalised before you do that, in case you write the character out. If the character is, for example, only in a third of the movie, and you think, there's a chance we might end up removing them from the script altogether.
Yeah, fair enough.
But yeah, that's ridiculous. Also, person who wrote this trivia, I've got questions. The Kung Fu Aztecs who attack Indiana and Mutt in the graveyard are not as historically accurate as one may think. You don't say! Shocking.
No one's thinking they're accurate.
They then add, pre-Spanish Peru Incans did in fact practice a martial art, but it was known as Rumi Makai, which literally translates as hard hands. No thank you, trivia writer, to all of that. Okay, last thing that happens in the Triv, Chris, as we all know, it's Cars Exist.
Meow.
So, the race at the beginning of the movie is between a Ford Model A and a 1950 Ford Deluxe. I like both those cars very much. I don't care for the race scene. It feels more like a, hey, George, you know how you like old cars and racing? Put that in for you, buddy. Wink. So, yeah, no thank you. But also, as well as cars existing, Chris, bikes exist. And Mutt's motorcycle is a Harley Davidson Softail Springer Classic.
Nice. How bad was my bike noise?
Pretty bad.
Bad, yeah, real bad. Sounded more like a dog, which, was deliberate because of Mutt.
Yeah. Although it's anachronistic because apparently even though the bike is designed to look like it's from that era, because it's supposed to be a classic, so it's like a modern Harley that looks like a classic. The actual car is the actual bike is likely to have been a model produced between 1999 and 2007. So the bike is anachronistic to some degree. It's designed to look like an old bike, but it is not.
Cool. Yeah, fair play. Where?
Cool.
Where, Dan, the big question. Obviously, we know we've summarised. Don't watch this movie. Where, Dan, to take us away from this movie?
Yeah.
Where are we going next?
Well, now I'm quite relieved because we had a chat a few months back, and we kind of settled a little bit on. We talked about, we both had one choice left after we'd done Indie, and I kind of hinted heavily what my choice was going to be, and I think you've forgotten.
I have, yeah.
Which is nice because I get to sort of tell you again, because I sort of hinted because it's going to be slightly more involved than just watching a movie, Chris. So,
right,
there's a movie that was the movie in the UK.
Oh yeah, I've remembered this
at a certain age, where it was handed around and shared and became a huge cultural touchstone for people of a certain age in England. Now, my understanding is, much to the surprise of the production company in the States, who didn't see anywhere near that level of interest or success in the American market for the movie, but once it was on DVD and it was £3 at HMV here in the UK, it seems like everyone bought a copy. The movie is a movie that I have long held as a really fascinating example of maybe a very happy accident, because my working theory, at least until we sit down to rewatch them for this thing, is that the movie's mysterious qualities is just because it was not looking great, and the studio forced the director to chop the movie into, within an inch of its life, and that actually led to the movie feeling kind of mysterious and interesting. But the thing is, a few years later, the director got to release a director's cut, and the director's cut is much, much worse, because it just explains everything and it doesn't work well. I am, of course, talking about Donnie Darko, which is a really fun, the original at least, a really fun, weird movie, and I think I'm going to do something we don't normally do. I am going to say with some confidence that I'm still going to be recommending the original cut. And that if anyone wants to watch it between now and that podcast, I would encourage that. I don't think I'm going to come on here next week, and this is how confident I am, Chris. I'm going to say almost now that I don't feel like there's any chance I come on here next week and say I don't recommend the original cut.
Yeah, and so for context, we are going to review and analyse the original cut, but we are also going to both watch the director's cut, so that we can comment on that. We're going to try very hard not to review that, but so that we can use it as evidence for why the original does or doesn't work.
Yes. Yeah, I think it is a fascinating movie to discuss, and I think both cuts are fascinating. So, Donnie Darko for the finale of this season of Rewind Reviews. I've had a really good time doing this. If you want to hear that early and you're listening to this on Spotify or iTunes, you can actually go to our Patreon right now, and for as little as $1 a month, you can be listening to us talk about Donnie Darko and its director's cut right now. We're reviewing Donnie Darko, as it is. That's the movie we're reviewing. The director's cut will simply be for discussion, like as part of the discussion of that movie and the things that do and don't work in it. It'll be as evidence. We're not going to be directly reviewing the director's cut, although I'm sure at some point we'll say whether we enjoyed rewatching that or not. I'm looking forward to it. You can hear it right now. Little as $1 a month if you're jumping on the Patreon. If you're listening to this already on Patreon, then I'm sorry, you've got to wait a week. Bad luck. And then, of course, the week after that, we're back to the wonderful world of The Last Airbender and Avatar for Season 2 of Korra. So I expect our subscriptions on Patreon to jump up the way they always do when we get to Korra. The same way that they always fall when a bunch of people cancel the week we go back to Rewind Reviews. It's fascinating.
But we'll take it.
We'll take it. No, we love it. We love that. We love having you guys on board. Also, of course, now, if you don't already know, monthly bonus content over on the Patreon. On the first of each month, we'll release something that is exclusive to the Patreon, usually something small, frivolous, and, that you won't if you're into what we do podcast wise, you won't feel like you're missing out on an important discussion point. It's something deliberately sort of silly and offbeat to ensure that no one feels like they're missing out if they can't join us on the Patreon. So we're doing Nothing But Lyrics at the moment, which is just a nice fun little podcast where we analyse the lyrics of a song and either make fun of it or try to figure out what the hell they're talking about. We've got a good one to record soon, the third one. I'm really excited to do. We'll probably do that once we've finished Rewind Reviews. We'll probably do it. We'll probably record it alongside Cora Series 2, I think. But I'm looking forward to doing that one. It's going to be a good laugh. So yeah, the first 2 episodes that were already recorded, and they're quite fun. Third one being recorded soon. That's everything on our YouTube. Go to YouTube if you have any comments or thoughts on anything you've just listened to. youtube.com/nothingbutstatic UK. You can find the video version of this podcast, which doesn't really have video of us talking, but it does have related images. It doesn't. It just has a spinning video. It's perfectly worthless, except for if you want to leave a comment. You can comment down there and then give us feedback. It's mail@nothingbutstatic.co.uk will reach us, and I have now set it up so I get Twitter alerts for anyone directly at me. So if someone does want to get in touch over Twitter, even though I don't log on to Twitter very often anymore, you can still get my attention now by doing @DanDoolan, and I'll see it. So you're welcome to do that if you wish. I think that's all the things.
I think that's all the things, yeah. We look forward to Donnie Darko, look forward to hopefully seeing some of you guys there, or hear it, or having some of you guys listen. That sentence went away with me. I'm gonna breeze right into the end. I've been Chris Billingham.
I've been Dan Doolan.
And this review has been Rewound.